The moment you picture Stonehenge, what flashes into your mind? Is it the massive gray stones standing sentinel against a vast chalk plain? A singular silent monument, perhaps, where druids once roamed?
That image is potent, and it's what draws millions of people every year. But that singular static vision is exactly what we are stripping away today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the iconic ring of massive sarsens with their perfect horizontal lintels, the image we all hold, is actually just the finished chapter, the climax of an epic 1,500-year-long architectural saga.
A saga, that's exactly the right word for it.
And that saga was built upon a landscape that had already been deemed sacred, utilized, and, known for ritual meaning for 4 millennia before the first stone was even raised. That is the deep time we are diving into.
It's a fantastic historical correction. Our mission today, based on your sources, is to move beyond the easy myth. We want to understand the staggering complex chronology, the astonishing logistics of movement, hundreds of miles in some cases, and the constantly shifting theories about why Neolithic and Bronze Age communities poured so much energy into this one spot on Salisbury Plain.
And just for context, if you haven't visited, we are talking about Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, located about 2 miles west of Amesbury. This site has been recognized as vital for a very long time. I mean, it was granted legally protected scheduled monument status way back in 1882.
1882, and then it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1986. It's an ancient symbol that requires modern international protection.
It certainly does. And while we're framing the history, let's quickly look at the origin of the name itself, which it tells us a little about how people viewed the stones historically.
Oh, this is a great little detail.
I love this language nugget. The name Stonehenge comes from the Old English words stand for stone, and then that distinctive suffix, henge. This is where scholars start arguing. It could derive from hench, which means hinge, a direct reference to those horizontal lintels resting on the uprights, like giant stone door hinges.
Or, and this is perhaps the darker, more intriguing possibility, it comes from hen. Hen, which meant to hang, or specifically gallows.
Gallows.
Yes, gallows. And we will actually see evidence later that in the medieval period, the site retained a kind of sinister significance related to that very idea of hanging or execution.
What's also fascinating for anyone studying ancient sites is that the suffix henge now defines an entire class of monuments in archaeology, a circular banked enclosure with an internal ditch.
And here's the irony. Stonehenge itself is technically a misnomer.
How so?
Well, its bank is actually outside the ditch. It breaks the very rule of the monument type it gave its name to. It really is the ultimate original, setting its own rules even in its designation.
It sets its own rules entirely. Okay, let's jump into the physical facts. What stands out to you right away when we examine the structure, the physical anatomy of the stones themselves, which comprise what we call the main monument, phase 3-2?
What stands out immediately is the tension between brute force and sophisticated refinement. You are looking at 2 distinct geological rock types, the massive sarsens and the smaller traveling bluestones, combined using construction techniques that feel incredibly advanced for the Neolithic era.
Let's start with the giants. The sarsens, the outer ring that defines the monument. These are enormous vertical standing stones. We are talking about stones around 13 feet high, 7 feet wide, and each weighing roughly 25 tons.
25 tons. To move one is a feat. To erect 30 of them in a perfect circle is, well, it's an industrial project.
And the crowning achievement is how they connected them. This is where the unique engineering comes in. The horizontal lintels resting on top of these sarsens are secured using mortise and tenon joints.
And if you don't know what that is, think of it like a peg and hole system. The vertical sarsen has a protruding peg or tenon carved into its top, and the lintel has a corresponding hole or mortise carved into its underside.
Wait, hold on. Mortise and tenon, that's a woodworking joint.
Exactly. That's what's so incredible. They were treating stone like a giant permanent form of timber. To meticulously carve that level of precision into hard stone repeatedly across 30 different joints, it suggests a level of technological transfer and planning that is completely unexpected.
They were trying to build a massive piece of furniture that was meant to stand for eternity.
That's a great way to put it. And this wasn't the only joint. They also used tongue and groove joints to link the lintels to each other horizontally, ensuring the entire ring interlocked into one solid piece.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the massive outer sarsen ring, you have the inner structures. First, a ring of smaller bluestones, which we'll discuss the incredible journey of those later.
We will, but don't dismiss the inner structures. Inside that bluestone ring are the 5 freestanding trilithons. A trilithon, as the name implies, is a structure of 3 stones.
Right. 2 uprights and 1 on top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
2 bulkier vertical sarsens connected by a single lintel. These 5 groups were arranged in a horseshoe shape, facing northeast. They were the true monumental centerpiece, the altar of the structure, if you like.
And it's the intentional architectural features on these stones that absolutely demonstrate the advanced intellect of the builders. They were actively correcting for human perception.
Yes, the sources highlight the sophisticated dressing of the stones that occurred specifically in Phase 3-2. If you look at the orthostats, the vertical uprights, they actually widen slightly toward the top.
Hang on, why would they widen them at the top? That seems counterintuitive if you want to save weight or material.
Because of optics. When you view a tall, vertical object from the ground, the common optical illusion is that it appears to narrow slightly as it rises away from your perspective. By widening the uprights at the top, they maintained a constant perspective when viewed from below.
So they were basically correcting for perspective distortion 4,500 years ago.
Precisely. It's an astounding piece of applied geometry and design. They were compensating for the visual effects of height and distance.
That is next-level design thinking. It suggests they had architects or master builders who understood things like visual mechanics and perspective. They weren't just brute-forcing stones into the ground.
Not at all. And that refinement continues on the horizontal pieces. The lintel stones were not perfectly straight, but were curved slightly to preserve the appearance of a perfect circle.
Oh, of course. If they had used straight lintels, the overall visual effect would have been polygonal, a bit clunky.
Yeah, exactly. But they went through the trouble of subtle dressing to ensure the continuous curve. You can also tell who the intended audience was based on the finishing work.
The inward-facing surfaces of the stones are consistently smoother and more finely worked than the outer surfaces. They wanted the viewer inside the sacred circle to have a different, more polished and refined experience.
And those lintels are massive, around 10 feet long and almost 3 feet thick, with the tops reaching about 16 feet above the ground. It's an incredible amount of weight suspended purely by those precisely cut joints. The engineering holds up.
It really does.
And all that deliberate, detailed work, the precision carpentry applied to stone, points toward the one overriding concept that dictates the monument's layout: celestial alignment.
This is the famous part, and it's the skeleton key to understanding its function. The entire monument, particularly its axis, is aligned precisely toward the sunrise on the summer solstice.
And the sunset on a winter solstice.
Right. But what I found fascinating in the sources is the idea that this alignment might not have been a purely human invention.
Oh, tell me about that. Well, the geology suggests that a natural landform at the monument's location, a series of parallel grooves left by Ice Age meltwater, already followed this solar line.
So the landscape itself was already pointing in that direction.
It seems so.
Yeah.
This may have been the initial inspiration for construction, that they weren't imposing their will on the land, but rather elevating a line of natural sacred significance that was already present.
So the landscape itself dictated the blueprint, and the builders recognized that sacred geography and decided to monumentalize it. But to understand the true magnitude of this effort, we need to go back much further than the stone circle. This wasn't an event. It was a deeply rooted, ongoing process.
Indeed. We need to begin in the Mesolithic era, at least 6,500 years ago, before anyone even thought about moving massive rocks.
Let's start with before the monument, dating from around 8,000 BC. How can archaeologists possibly date structures from that far back, beneath the former car park, no less?
They found 4, possibly 5, large Mesolithic post holes. The dating comes from the traces of the organic material, the charcoal from the massive pine posts that filled them, and these posts were huge, over 2 feet in diameter.
So these were like giant totem poles or something?
Possibly. But the crucial detail is that they were aligned east-west.
Okay, there it is. That strongly suggests that even these earliest inhabitants, hunter-gatherers, not the later farmers, were using the space for some form of solar or celestial observation or ritual placement thousands of years before the Neolithic transition. It implies the land held meaning long before it became Stonehenge.
And that significance is reinforced by the discovery nearby at Blickmead, a reliable year-round spring. Charcoal found there dates to 4000 BC. This confirms that a stable community was consistently utilizing or living near this location for several millennia.
It wasn't just a place they visited, it was a place they continuously knew and used.
Exactly. That continuity makes the later construction decisions feel less random. Now, let's move to the first major phase, Stonehenge 1, starting around 3100 BC. This phase was defined by massive earthworks.
This was the formation of the circular bank and ditch enclosure, spanning about 360 feet in diameter, with a main entrance to the northeast. What's interesting here is the ditch construction itself.
It is. The sources reveal that the ditch was dug in sections, likely by different work groups, using basic tools like antler picks. But the fascinating ritual detail is what they buried in the ditch.
Right, they buried the bones of deer and oxen in the bottom of the ditch. But the critical piece of data is that these bones were considerably older than the picks used to dig the ditch.
So they weren't fresh food waste. They were curated.
Curated? What do you mean by that?
They were kept, revered, and perhaps treated as sacred relics of ancestors or specific ritual objects before being purposefully placed in the very foundation of the new monument. It's evidence of intentional ritual burial from the start.
It absolutely reinforces the idea that this site was immediately established as a domain of the dead, a place for ancestor worship, as scholars like Mike Parker Pearson argue.
And right inside that enclosure, we find the famous Aubrey holes.
56 pits, named after the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey, who first recorded them. For decades, the consensus was that these held a ring of standing timbers.
But recent excavation evidence is very compelling, suggesting a major timeline shift. They may have been the sockets for the first bluestones.
Wait, really? The bluestones?
It's a huge claim. If this evidence holds, it advances the use of stone at Stonehenge by 500 years, placing the long-distance travel of those Welsh stones right into the earliest period.
That would mean the most difficult logistical feat was also one of the earliest. But regardless of whether they held stone or timber, the most crucial finding related to this phase remains the burials.
Yes, this is definitive proof of its early funerary function. Excavations have yielded over 50,000 cremated bone fragments from 63 individuals, dating to around 3000 BC. These remains included men, women, and children. It was a community burial ground.
But the key revelation comes from the science applied to those remains. Isotope analysis on the bone fragments shows that many of these buried individuals were likely from near the bluestone source in Wales, far from local Salisbury Plain.
This is a major insight. It tells us Stonehenge wasn't just a local cemetery. From its inception, it served as a burial ground for an elite or a specific, perhaps founding, group associated with a far-off region, Wales. It anchors the monument's significance directly to the Presley Hills ancestry.
So it's an ancestral monument linked not just to the land beneath it, but to a traveling or perhaps conquering elite from hundreds of miles away. Moving to Stonehenge 2 around 2900 BC, construction temporarily pivots back to timber structures inside the enclosure.
And during this phase, the Aubrey holes definitively solidify their role as funerary pits, with at least 25 containing cremation burials. The sheer density of human remains makes Stonehenge the earliest known enclosed cremation cemetery in the British Isles. For centuries, its primary, unequivocal function was housing the dead.
Then, around 2600 BC, the builders, whoever they were by this point, changed their minds again. We hit Stonehenge 3I, the Great Experiment, the first stone attempt.
This is when they definitively abandoned timber for good. They dug the Q&R holes, intending to place up to 80 bluestones in them. They also erected the heel stone, which is tertiary sandstone, outside the enlarged northeast entrance.
The heel stone is fascinating because it's placed precisely to match the direction of the midsummer sunrise, setting the solar framework that defines the monument today. It was likely accompanied by a second stone, which is now gone.
This entire effort, however, was clearly unfinished. They dug the holes, perhaps placed some stones, but then they were apparently removed. It's a mystery why they abandoned this elaborate plan, but it represents a pause, a moment of reevaluation before the greatest effort of all.
And during this same initial stone phase, they introduced the ceremonial roadway that gives the site context. The Stonehenge Avenue, a parallel pair of ditches and banks leading 2 miles straight to the River Avon. It's physically linking the stone monument to the water source.
Exactly. But the real climax, the image that has endured for 4,500 years, is Stonehenge 3-2, the megalithic climax, built rapidly between 2600 and 2400 BC. This is when the Sarsen giants arrive.
The 30 massive Sarsen stones were brought in, dressed with that remarkable precision we discussed, and erected in the 98-foot diameter circle, topped with 30 lintels. This is the moment when those highly refined woodworking techniques, like the mortise and tenon and the tongue and groove, are put to their ultimate test in stone.
And the 5 huge Sarsen trilithons, weighing up to 50 tons each, arranged in the horseshoe, also facing northeast. The largest of these would have towered 24 feet high. Imagine seeing that structure completed for the first time. It would have been absolutely breathtaking.
We also see intriguing cultural markings added during this phase, or slightly later. Ancient carvings of a dagger and 14 axe heads found on stones 3, 4, 5, and 53.
These carvings are morphologically similar to late Bronze Age weapons, which means the monument remained a canvas for cultural expression long after the main construction was over. It continued to be venerated and marked by subsequent cultures who revere the structure.
And if we want to understand the sheer organization required to achieve this massive construction in just a couple of centuries, we have to look 2 miles away to the builders' camp at Durrington Walls.
Durrington Walls is a stunning counterpoint to Stonehenge. Evidence found there, particularly from analysis of animal teeth, paints a vivid picture of Neolithic life. The sheer volume of domestic animal remains suggests as many as 4,000 people gathered for midwinter and midsummer festivals.
4,000 people. That's essentially a temporary city forming twice a year.
Oh, absolutely. And think about the logistics just of the feasting. Strontium isotope analysis, which tracks the origin of the animals through their diet and environment, showed that some of the cattle and pigs had been brought from as far afield as the Scottish Highlands for these celebrations.
Scotland. That means this was a national event, drawing people and their most prized livestock from hundreds of miles away to feast and participate in these seasonal rituals. The effort alone suggests a massive degree of political or cultural coordination across the whole island.
And Durrington Walls wasn't just a camp for feasts. It was itself a massive construction, a kind of counter-monument to Stonehenge. They constructed a large timber circle there inside a henge much larger than Stonehenge's.
And crucially, the timber circle at Durrington Walls was oriented toward the rising sun on the midwinter solstice, the exact opposite alignment of the stone circle at Stonehenge, which highlights the midsummer sun.
That intentional opposition is the foundation for the famous ritual landscape theory, which frames the entire valley as a massive ceremonial stage.
And the building effort didn't end with the climax of Phase 3-2. We have subsequent Phases 3-3, 3-4, and 3V, which spanned centuries and saw continuous rearrangement of the bluestones, placing them inside the sarsen circle and then pulling some of them into a horseshoe shape that mirrored the outer sarsens. The builders were constantly tinkering, curating, and reshaping their masterpiece until about 1600 BC.
And even after that, the site retained significance. We see evidence of substantial ceremonial use in the Roman era, with late 4th century Roman coins and pottery, demonstrating that even Roman settlers treated the location with reverence.
And circling back to that sinister name nugget, the discovery of a decapitated Saxon male skeleton, dated between 600 and 690 AD, found inside the circles, suggests it was still a powerful, perhaps even judicial or sacrificial place in the early Middle Ages, linking back to that gallows etymology. The monument's meaning evolved continuously but never disappeared.
It's a profound story of continuity, but let's turn to the question that still mystifies people today. How did they manage the greatest logistical feat of the ancient world?
When you look at Stonehenge, you are looking at a masterclass in ancient procurement and sheer back-breaking effort across huge geographic distances. Let's talk rock procurement.
Okay, starting with the relatively local giants, the sarsens. These enormous vertical scones are Oligocene-Miocene sandstone. For years, the precise location was debated, but new analysis in 2020 confirmed their origin. West Woods, Wiltshire, which is only about 16 miles north of Stonehenge.
16 miles? That distance sounds manageable, until you remember, these are 25-ton blocks being moved without wheels, without modern machinery, and without powerful draft animals. It's an immense organized effort requiring hundreds of people just to move one stone, 16 miles, across terrain that isn't always flat.
A huge undertaking,
Yeah.
but it wasn't the biggest journey these stones made. Not by a long shot. The sarsens are local compared to the bluestones.
Right. The bluestones made of materials like dolerite, tuff, rhyolite, and sandstone are the true long-distance travelers. Their source is definitively placed in the Preseli Hills, Pembrokeshire, Wales. We are talking about distances of 140 to 230 kilometers away.
When that fact first became known, it immediately launched one of the great archaeological debates. Were they transported by humans, or were they glacial erratics, carried closer to Salisbury Plain by the Irish Sea Glacier and then repurposed?
The old glacier theory.
The old glacier theory, exactly. Which, while convenient, has very little geological evidence to support it in southern central England. And the human agency theory was strongly bolstered by a critical 2019 publication.
That publication confirmed definitive evidence of megalithic quarrying at the Welsh sites, like Craig Rossi Phelan. They found actual tool marks and the remains of platforms used to extract the stones.
So this confirms human agency was responsible. They didn't just find them lying around, they actively dug them out.
Right, and that confirmation of human quarrying launched the truly fascinating theory about the Wan Mon connection, which you mentioned in your sources.
This is where we connect the origins of the builders back to the stones. Researchers discovered the remains of a dismantled stone circle at Wan Mon in the Presley Hills. And get this circle was 110 meters in diameter, identical in size to the first known Stonehenge earthwork circle from Phase 1. Identical. It was also oriented similarly. And here's the detail that made headlines around the world. One rock hole found at Wan Mon matched the unique pentagonal cross-section of a specific bluestone, stone 62, currently standing at Stonehenge. Archaeologists described the fit as being like a key in a lock.
Wow. So the initial hypothesis, which was so powerful, suggested that the Welsh site was symbolically or literally dismantled and moved whole to Salisbury Plain. This would symbolize the unification of the two regions, or perhaps an ancestral migration. I mean, the Wan Mon site was erected around 3400, 3200 BC, and then dismantled 300, 400 years later, lining up perfectly with the arrival of the stones at Salisbury Plain.
That original hypothesis painted a picture of a massive unified cultural migration. However, later work in 2021 introduced a necessary nuance. Subsequent analysis suggested that the Wan Mon circle may never have been fully completed, and perhaps no more than a symbolic portion up to 13 stones were removed.
So it wasn't the complete physical relocation of a whole stone city, but rather the symbolic movement of ancestral stones representing the Welsh homeland, carried by the people who settled on Salisbury Plain. That makes the journey even more profound because they weren't moving functional items, they were moving history and identity.
Precisely. The connection between the two sacred centers is undeniable, whether it was a small symbolic migration or a massive one. But just when you thought the logistics couldn't get any more extreme, we have the altar stone.
Ah, the altar stone. This single sandstone block lies buried beneath the central trilithon horseshoe. It was once thought to come from the Senni beds in the Brecon Beacons, about 50 miles east of the Presley Hills. A respectable, but not record-breaking, journey.
Prepare for the latest, truly shocking finding, announced in 2024. New chemical analysis suggests the best match for the altar stone is with rocks found in the Orcadian Basin.
The Orcadian Basin? Where is that?
A region that includes Caithness and the Moray Firth in northeast Scotland.
You're kidding me! Scotland! We are no longer talking about Wales? That implies a transport distance of roughly 430 miles, or 690 kilometers. That is an extreme journey for a single block of stone without any modern infrastructure.
It's insane. If that provenance is confirmed, it fundamentally rewrites our understanding of prehistoric Britain. It demonstrates profound, high-level cultural links between southern England and northern Scotland in the Neolithic era, a span of movement, trade, and interaction that few people would have imagined for that time period. This wasn't just a regional project, it was a collaborative effort covering the entire island.
So we know where they came from and why they were important ancestral, symbolic, sacred objects, but how did they actually move them? We have to address the myth of supernatural construction head on.
Absolutely. The conventional Neolithic techniques, using only human power, were demonstrably effective. Researchers have successfully shown that basic methods like shear legs, a simple tripod frame, can be used to lift and position stones of similar size into their upright sockets.
Okay, so lifting them into place is one thing, but the long-distance transportation is the bigger challenge. The general theory involves a rolling log track, which is straightforward but immensely difficult to maintain over hundreds of kilometers.
The alternative theory is even more intriguing, using a type of sleigh running on a track greased with animal fat to reduce friction. This requires much less complex infrastructure than trying to find or mill enough round logs for continuous movement.
And we know this is possible because it was put to a very real test in 1995 near Stonehenge. A team of more than 100 workers managed to push and pull a 40-ton slab of stone about 18 miles. The myth that the logistics were impossible for Neolithic man is soundly debunked by experiment. The question isn't how, but why they bothered.
And that why leads us away from brute logistics and toward sound itself. Let's talk about the acoustic revelation regarding the bluestones.
We've covered the unbelievable physical effort of the bluestones, but I found the idea that they were moved in part for a completely non-physical reason for their sound to be mind-blowing. Tell us about this acoustic discovery.
This is truly unique research from the Royal College of Art. They discovered that the igneous bluestones possess unusual acoustic properties. When struck, they produce a loud clanging noise. These are technically known as lithophonic or ringing rocks.
Ringing rocks. And the sources mention that this phenomenon isn't new to the area. In Wales, the local village of Clwchog, which literally translates to bell stones or ringing stones, used local bluestones as church bells until the 18th century.
Exactly. And in ancient cultures across the world, rocks that ring out often held mystical or healing powers. This acoustic property, the way the stones literally sing, serves as powerful physical evidence supporting the hypothesis that Stonehenge was intended, at least in part, as a place for healing. The stones themselves, through their sound, were thought to possess curative or spiritual energy.
That dramatically shifts the meaning, connecting the physical movement of the stones to an ethereal auditory experience.
It does. It adds a whole new sensory layer to the monument.
Now that we've established the what and how of the construction and the extreme logistics, let's look at the who through the lens of recent DNA studies. This completely changes the historical narrative, revealing radical demographic shifts.
This is the immense plot twist in the story of Stonehenge. The people who initiated the first phases, Stonehenge 13-2, the earthworks, and the cremation cemetery, were Neolithic farmers.
Their ancestry has been traced back primarily to Anatolia, having brought agriculture to Europe thousands of years earlier. Their genetic profile was complex, about 75% ancestry from early European farmers who traveled via the eastern Mediterranean and Iberia, and 25% from Western hunter-gatherers.
But here's a significant genetic twist which provides insight into their social structure. Despite their overall majority farmer ancestry, the paternal Y-DNA lineages were almost exclusively of Western hunter-gatherer origins, specifically the I2A haplogroup.
Wait, so genetically they are primarily farmers, but their dominant male lineage, the line that dictates ancestry and power structure, came from the previous hunter-gatherer groups that they had largely replaced across Europe.
Exactly. This strongly suggests a male sex-biased admixture occurred on the continent before they migrated to Britain. The farmers effectively absorbed the dominant male lines of the older population, indicating a complex power dynamic or unique marriage customs that favored the male lineages of the original inhabitants.
This complex genetic tapestry defines the builders of the earliest Stonehenge. But this story gets radically interrupted around 2500 BC, right at the time of the Sarsen construction, Phase 3-2. This is the arrival of the Bell Beaker people.
The Bell Beaker people migrated from mainland Europe, likely speaking early Indo-European languages, with ancestors tracing back to the Pontic-Caspian steppe. They initially lived side by side with the Neolithic farmers for perhaps a few centuries.
But the shocking data from burial analysis shows that their arrival led to a profound cultural and genetic replacement. Over 90% of Britain's Neolithic gene pool was replaced by the Bell Beaker people, who carried about 50% Western steppe herders' ancestry.
A 90% turnover is staggering. It's one of the most complete demographic shifts recorded in prehistory. You have a completely different genetic lineage, language, and culture effectively taking over Britain.
But here's the enduring mystery. They didn't tear down Stonehenge. Instead, they adopted it, completed it with the massive Sarsen phase, and incorporated it into their own belief system.
That continuity, despite such radical demographic replacement, underscores the inherent power of the monument itself. It was bigger than any single culture that built it.
Why was it so important that two genetically distinct societies would dedicate so much effort to it? This forces us to address the competing theories of function.
We have four major theories, and the genius of this site is that they likely all coexisted or succeeded one another over the centuries.
Let's start with the famous one that captured the public imagination in the 1960s, the astronomical observatory theory. Gerald Hawkins theorized that the site was set out to observe the sun and moon over a recurring 56-year cycle.
Right. If the site was truly set up this way, using the Aubrey holes or other markers, it would have allowed for the potential prediction of celestial events like eclipses, solstices, and equinoxes. This knowledge would have bestowed immense power upon the priests or astronomers who understood the pattern, vital for controlling agricultural cycles and religious festivals.
And its primary solar alignment, of course, is the foundation for this theory.
Absolutely.
Then we have the place of healing theory, often dubbed the primeval lords. This was championed by researchers like Wainwright and Darville.
This is supported by evidence we've already touched upon. First, the high number of burials in the area, specifically the evidence of trauma deformity found in some of the graves. People may have traveled great distances, as the isotopic analysis of buried individuals suggests, like the famous Amesbury archer who traveled from Germany to seek cure at this sacred place.
And the connection to the bluestones solidifies this. The acoustic ringing properties of the bluestones strongly suggest they were sought out and transported, specifically because they were believed to hold mystical, curative properties, perhaps used in healing ceremonies performed at the site.
Next is the popular ritual landscape theory, the domain of the dead versus land of the living, proposed by Mike Parker Pearson. This theory takes the entire geography into account.
This is where Durrington Walls comes into play again. Stonehenge, built of stone, is enduring, a domain of the dead and ancestors, aligned with the life-giving summer sun. It is ritually linked via the avenue and the River Avon to Durrington Walls.
The massive timber circle, built of temporary wood, representing the land of the living, aligned with the scarcity of the midwinter sun.
The ritual journey, perhaps involving moving a deceased person or a ceremonial procession, would take place along the Avon, symbolizing the ritual passage from the temporary world of life, wood, to the eternal world of death and ancestry, stone. It's a grand theater-like stage for a cycle of life and death.
A beautiful and compelling theory.
Finally, there is the powerful hypothesis that Stonehenge was built simply as a symbol of unity.
This theory suggests it was created during a period when Britain's Neolithic people, perhaps disparate tribal groups, were experiencing cultural unification. Think about the logistical effort. The feasting animals brought from Scotland, the ancestral stones brought from Wales, and the sarsens brought locally in Wiltshire.
The coordination required for such a national-scale project implies a grand collaboration, a massive undertaking intended to bridge cultural divides and unify culturally separate regions under one shared sacred center. It was the ultimate unifying piece of public art.
And as we said, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Stonehenge could have started as a burial ground, evolved into a symbol of unification, and been used by later cultures as an astronomical clock and a healing sanctuary. Its function, like its construction, was layered and evolving.
This site's immense gravitational pull didn't end with the Bell Beaker people. Its spiritual and cultural significance persisted right through the historical period.
Absolutely. The Roman era saw substantial ritual or ceremonial activity. Archaeologists have found late 4th century Roman coins, Roman-era pottery, and pit-buried animal bones, all suggesting a formal reverence. One excavation even found a bluestone slab incorporated into a grave containing a Roman coin. The Romans, who built massive structures themselves, clearly recognized the power of this site.
And moving into the medieval period, we find that grim evidence again. That decapitated Saxon male skeleton, dating from 600–690 AD, found inside the circles, suggests a judicial or sacrificial execution.
That links directly back to that dark definition of the name, doesn't it? The contemporary name, henge hanging or gallows, might be related to the idea that the site was used as a place of public, fearful execution, or perhaps the sheer size of the trilithons resembled a gibbet. It retained a powerful, almost menacing importance for centuries.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Age of Enlightenment, it became the focus of intense antiquarian research, much of which was insightful, and some of which was, well, laughably wrong.
John Aubrey, in 1666, was crucial. He was one of the first to look with a critical scientific eye, recording the Aubrey holes that bear his name. But the person who arguably shaped the popular imagination the most was William Stukely in the early 18th century.
Stukely. He was meticulous, but he made the major blunder of linking the site incorrectly to the Druids, the ancient Celtic priestly class.
And that mistake stuck. It persisted in the popular imagination for centuries, inspiring literature and folklore, even though later archaeological evidence clearly placed the stones millennia before the arrival of the historical Druids. But Stukely's work remains important.
The most accurate early plan, though, came from John Wood the Elder in 1740. His survey is vitally important because it captured the state of the monument before the catastrophic collapse of the Southwest Trilithon in 1797, giving modern restorers a necessary baseline.
And this brings us to the strange story of the site's acquisition and preservation in the modern era, starting the early 1900s.
It's hard to believe, but Stonehenge was actually put up for auction in 1915. The manor that owned the land was selling off assets. It was purchased on a whim by a local man named Cecil Chubb for £6,600.
It was a fascinating, almost accidental act of preservation. He only held on to it for 3 years before gifting it to the nation in 1918, believing strongly that a site of such national importance should belong to the British people.
That gift was generous, but the site was far from pristine. The surrounding view was completely scarred by the First World War Stonehenge aerodrome, built for the Royal Flying Corps, complete with large stone and brick hangars, scarring the skyline just 300 meters from the stones.
This led to a massive grassroots effort. The Save the Skyline subscription fund was launched in 1927. George V was the lead subscriber, signaling the national importance of the effort. They raised enough money to purchase the surrounding plots and thankfully demolished the aerodrome by the mid-1930s, restoring the view.
And beyond the view, the stones themselves required constant maintenance. We see extensive restoration work throughout the 20th century because the stones are naturally unstable due to their ancient installation methods.
Yes, they straightened Sarsen 56 in 1901 after it tilted precariously. They re-erected 3 sarsens in 1958 and restored Stone 23 in 1963 after it fell over. Without that continuous 20th century intervention, the famous ring would look far more dilapidated today.
Shifting back to folklore, let's quickly revisit some of the enduring myths that have kept the monument culturally alive, tying into that earlier sense of Druid mystery.
The primary legend is the Arthurian legend, popularized by Geoffrey of Monmouth's 12th century tale. He claimed the stones were healing stones, the Giant's Ring, brought from Ireland by Merlin after a battle and re-erected as a memorial to fallen knights.
While pure fiction, the sources note that this legend may hold a strange grain of truth, given that the bluestones did come from Wales, which was perceived as the ancestral land in that era, and those stones do possess acoustic shielding properties.
It's a fascinating echo. And the heel stone legend offers a wonderful folk tale involving the devil. The story goes that the devil boasted no one would know how the stones arrived, and when a friar argued otherwise, the devil threw a stone at him, striking him on the heel. The stone stuck in the ground, giving the heel stone its common nickname, the friar's heel.
These ancient and medieval narratives fed directly into the 20th century revival of its religious significance, the rise of Neopaganism and Neo-Druidism, embracing the mystical connections that Stukely had erroneously popularized.
The ancient order of Druids held a mass initiation ceremony there in 1905, seeking to reclaim the site as their ancestral church. This set the stage for later use, but also for later conflict.
And that leads directly to the modern conflict over access. From 1972 to 1984, the Stonehenge Free Festival drew massive crowds, sometimes up to 30,000 visitors for the summer solstice, turning the landscape into a counterculture gathering spot.
The scale and uncontrolled nature of these festivals created tension between authorities, preservationists, and the festival goers. That escalation culminated in 1985.
A high court injunction closed the site to festival goers that year, leading to the infamous and violent confrontation between police and New Age travelers known as the Battle of the Beanfield. It was a massive culture clash, resulting in an exclusion zone policy that completely barred access to the stones on solstices and equinoxes for nearly 15 years.
It wasn't until campaigner action and a European Court of Human Rights ruling that restrictions were finally lifted in the early 2000s, recognizing the right of religious groups to worship in what they consider their church. Limited, regulated, open access began again in 2000, attracting thousands of modern Druids and pagans.
Finally, let's discuss the environmental and structural controversies that persist today. Historically, vandalism was rife. Tourists used chisels to take souvenirs until 1900. Modern vandalism, like spray painting the monument purple in 1984, required fencing and exclusion zones to be put in place.
But the most significant modern controversy, and one that just concluded, is the A303 road tunnel crisis. The A303 trunk road, linking London to the southwest, runs dangerously close to the monument, scarring the ritual landscape and causing immense traffic problems.
The long-standing political plan was to build a 4-lane tunnel to take traffic below the site, aiming to restore the natural landscape and reconnect the avenue to the River Avon. It seemed like a win-win for some.
But it faced massive opposition from archaeologists and environmentalists who argued the plan was flawed. Their fear was twofold. First, that digging the tunnel would destroy priceless unexcavated buried artifacts and archaeology in the World Heritage Site. And second, that the tunneling work could destabilize the famous sarsen stones themselves. Opponents repeatedly labeled it state-sponsored vandalism.
It was a legal and political nightmare, approved in 2020, then faced multiple high court challenges, most of which were rejected. The project seemed inevitable.
But the final political decision came in July 2024, when the incoming government announced the tunnel scheme would not move forward, effectively canceling the decades-old multi-billion-pound project. It's a powerful reflection of how emotionally and politically charged the protection of this single ancient site remains. illustrating that its fate is still being actively decided by the current generation.
That brings us full circle, from 8,000 BC post holes to a 2024 political standoff. The stones endure, and their story continues to be written.
If we synthesize this deep dive, two crucial takeaways stand out for you. First, Stonehenge was emphatically not a static, singular construction. It was a complex, evolving, multi-phase project spanning 1,500 years and involving massive demographic shifts, the Neolithic farmers being largely replaced by the Bell Beaker people. Yet the monument retained its power regardless of who stood before it.
And the second takeaway is the shocking global scope of the logistics. This wasn't local building. It required the transportation of stones, hundreds of miles, connecting southern England physically and culturally, not just to Wales, but potentially all the way to northern Scotland for the altar stone. This was a national project built on massive human coordination and effort.
What truly stands out, above all the engineering and astronomy, is how the stones managed to retain their immense spiritual and cultural importance, surviving radical population changes and thousands of years of shifting belief systems. Its functions, whether as an astronomical clock, a healing center, or a sacred symbol of unification, were constantly layered one upon the other, reflecting a continually shifting sacred landscape. It makes you wonder, if an object can survive a 90% population replacement and still retain its meaning, how deep do the human connections to sacred space truly run?